The 1970s were a tough time for black families across America, and the groceries they bought when money was tight told a story of survival and pride. These items stretched every dollar while keeping tables full and traditions alive. But some of what filled those carts has vanished from stores today, and the reason goes deeper than you might think. The decade brought economic storms that hit black communities especially hard. The oil crisis sent prices skyrocketing. Unemployment in black neighborhoods reached devastating levels, sometimes double the national average. Inflation ate away at paychecks that were already too small. For many families, the weekly trip to the grocery store became a calculated mission where every penny had to count. Yet in the face of these challenges, black families demonstrated incredible resourcefulness. The wisdom of Southern cooking traditions, passed down through generations, became a survival guide. Grandmothers taught mothers, mothers taught daughters, and the knowledge of how to make something delicious from almost nothing became a form of cultural wealth, more valuable than money itself. The grocery carts of the 1970s weren't just filled with food. They carried history, tradition, and the determination of a people who refused to let hard times break their spirit. Walk into any black household on a Sunday afternoon, and you'd smell greens simmering on the stove, cornbread baking in the oven, and the unmistakable aroma of love transforming humble ingredients into feasts. The ingredients might have been cheap, but the meals were priceless. This is the story of 20 groceries that kept black families fed, connected, and strong during one of America's most challenging decades. Some of these items you might remember. Others might surprise you. But all of them reveal something powerful about resilience, creativity, and the unbreakable bond between food and family in black culture. Buying neck bones and ham hocks to flavor beans and greens was a smart way of making affordable ingredients taste incredible. These meat cuts were cheap because most people overlooked them, but black families knew their value. A single ham hock could transform a pot of collard greens or butter beans into something rich and satisfying. Neck bones simmered slowly on low heat released deep flavors that made even the simplest dishes special. For many families, these weren't just budget cuts. They were essentials that connected them to Southern cooking traditions, passed down through generations. Mothers and grandmothers taught children how to season and cook these pieces perfectly, turning what others saw as scraps into Sunday dinner centerpieces. The smell of neck bones cooking on the stove filled the whole house with warmth and comfort. Today, neck bones and ham hocks have gotten expensive, but back then, they were survival tools that fed families without breaking the budget. Grabbing day-old bread from the discount rack was a regular stop for families trying to stretch their grocery budgets. Bakeries sold discounted bread that was still in perfect condition but had just passed its peak freshness by a day. For black families in the 1970s, this was an easy way to save money without sacrificing quality. The bread was still soft enough for sandwiches, and if it had gotten a little stale, it was perfect for French toast or bread pudding. Children didn't mind because they knew it tasted the same when fried with butter. Some families would freeze extra loaves to make them last longer throughout the week. Going to the discount rack wasn't shameful. It was practical and smart. Mothers taught their children that spending money on full-price bread made no sense when day-old bread was just fine. This habit became a source of pride because it showed you were clever about managing a tight household budget. Buying liver and chicken gizzards as affordable protein was a common choice for families who needed to feed everyone without spending too much. These pieces were cheap because many people found them too tough or unusual, but black cooks knew exactly how to prepare them. Liver was usually soaked in milk to remove the bitterness, then fried with onions until it was tender and flavorful. Chicken gizzards were cleaned, seasoned, and either fried crispy or simmered in gravy until soft. For children, eating liver and gizzards was part of life. Even if they didn't always love it, parents reminded them that protein was protein, and these pieces kept them strong and healthy. The meals made from liver and gizzards were filling and satisfying, proving you didn't need expensive steaks to put good food on the table. Grandmothers especially had recipes that served these ingredients with amazing flavors, and their cooking skills made all the difference. Using powdered milk instead of fresh was a sacrifice many families made to save money on their grocery bills. Fresh milk was expensive and spoiled quickly, but powdered milk could sit in the pantry for months and cost far less. Mothers would mix the powder with water, shake it up, and pour it into the regular carton they always used. Children could usually tell the difference because powdered milk was thinner and had a slightly off taste, but they learned to drink it anyway. While it wasn't the same as real milk, it worked just fine for cereal, cooking, and baking. Some families mixed powdered milk with a little fresh milk to improve the taste and stretch their budgets even further. For parents, choosing powdered milk wasn't about being cheap. It was about making sure there was milk in the house when money was tight. Children learned that complaining wouldn't change anything, so they adapted and moved on with their lives. Getting access to government cheese and peanut butter was a reality for many black families struggling to get by in the 70s. These products came in plain boxes with simple labels and were distributed through federal assistance programs to help low-income households. The cheese came in large blocks, often 5 pounds or heavier, and the peanut butter came in big, generic containers. The cheese was dense, creamy, and melted beautifully, making it perfect for grilled cheese sandwiches and macaroni and cheese. The peanut butter was smooth and thick, ideal for sandwiches that kept children full throughout the school day. For many families, there was no shame in accepting government food because they knew everyone was doing their best to survive. Neighbors and relatives often shared what they received, creating a sense of community and support during hard times. Children didn't mind eating government cheese because it tasted good and filled them up. The experience taught lessons about resourcefulness and the importance of helping each other when times got tough. Buying fatback to keep meals flavorful on a tight budget was essential. Fatback was exactly what it sounds like: thick strips of pork fat that cost very little but added incredible richness to dishes. Black cooks would render the fat in a pan, creating their own cooking oil that could be used for frying or saved for later. A small piece of fatback thrown into a pot of beans, greens, or cabbage would give the dish a deep, smoky taste like it had been cooking all day. For families who couldn't afford butter or expensive oils, fatback was a pantry staple that never seemed to run out. Grandmothers kept jars of rendered fatback grease on the stove, using it to fry chicken, make cornbread, or cook vegetables. The crispy bits left over from rendering the fat were often eaten as snacks or crumbled on top of dishes for extra flavor. Buying oxtails before they became expensive was a smart move for families who knew how to cook them right. In the 70s, oxtails were considered an undesirable meat cut and sold for very low prices. Butchers were happy to get rid of them, and black families were happy to take them home. Oxtails needed to be cooked slowly to become tender, and the result was a rich, hearty stew that tasted like a special occasion meal. After simmering on low heat for hours, the meat would fall off the bone and the broth would be dark and flavorful. For many families, oxtails were saved for Sundays or special gatherings because they felt luxurious even though they were cheap. Children loved the rich gravy served over rice or mashed potatoes, soaking up every bit of flavor. Mothers and grandmothers guarded their oxtail recipes closely, each adding their own twist with different spices and vegetables. Buying grits in large bags was essential for black families who wanted to fill their bellies without emptying their wallets. Grits came in big, plain bags that could last for weeks or even months, depending on family size. A single serving of grits was incredibly cheap and could be made fancier or plainer, depending on what else was in the kitchen. For breakfast, grits were served hot with butter, salt, and black pepper, sometimes with a little sugar for children who preferred them sweet. Leftover grits could be poured into a pan, cooled, sliced, and fried for another meal later in the week. Grits could also be used as a side dish at dinner, paired with fried fish, pork chops, or greens. Their versatility and low cost made grits a pantry essential. Grandmothers taught younger generations how to cook grits perfectly, constantly stirring to prevent lumps and adding just the right amount of water. Serving pig's feet at Sunday dinner was a tradition that turned a cheap meat cut into a special meal. Pig's feet were cheap because many people didn't know how to cook them or didn't find them appetizing, but black families had perfected this cooking method over generations. The feet required careful cleaning and long, slow cooking, usually simmered with vinegar, onions, and spices until the meat was tender and the broth was rich. The result was a delicious meal that families looked forward to after church on Sundays. Some families made pickled pig's feet, storing them in jars to eat throughout the week as a tangy snack. For children, Eating pig's feet was an adventure, separating the tender meat from the bones and savoring each bite. Mothers and grandmothers took pride in their pig's feet recipes, each adding their own special touch to make the dish memorable. Filling the cart with generic brand canned vegetables was a practical choice that saved families significant money on every shopping trip. Name brand vegetables were expensive, but generic brands offered the same product for much less. The cans had plain white labels with simple black letters saying green beans, corn, or peas. No fancy pictures or marketing gimmicks. For Black families on tight budgets, the savings added up quickly, especially when buying several cans at once. The vegetables still tasted great when heated and properly seasoned with butter, salt, and pepper. Mothers knew how to add extra flavor to canned vegetables by throwing in onions, bacon bits, or fatback to give them a homemade taste. Children didn't care if the can was generic or name brand as long as the food on their plates was delicious. Shopping generic wasn't about cutting corners. It was about using money wisely. Stocking up on canned meat and Vienna sausages meant having protein in the house without spending a lot of money, especially when times were tight. These canned meats were affordable, sat on shelves for a long time, and could be turned into a meal in minutes. Spam could be sliced and fried until crispy, served with eggs at breakfast or in a sandwich at lunch. Corned beef hash was ready to heat, usually fried in a pan until the edges were brown and crispy. For children, Spam and corned beef hash were surprisingly tasty when cooked right and seasoned well. Some families would mix corned beef hash with potatoes and onions to make it even more flavorful and feed more people. These canned meats weren't gourmet, but they got the job done. Mothers appreciated how these pantry staples stretched the grocery budget and kept the family fed. Buying cornmeal in bulk for cornbread and fish frying was crucial for Black families who relied on these staples. Cornmeal was cheap and versatile, used to make fluffy cornbread that paired perfectly with greens, beans, and stews. A single bag of cornmeal could last for weeks and form the foundation of countless meals and sides. Cornbread, served hot from the oven or skillet with melting butter, was a table staple. Leftover cornbread could be crumbled into milk for breakfast or used to make dressing for holiday meals. Cornmeal was also the essential coating for frying fish, catfish, whiting, or perch before dropping them into hot oil. The crispy golden crust that cornmeal created made fried fish a family favorite, especially on Fridays or weekends. Grandmothers had their own distinctive cornbread recipes. Some added a little sugar for sweetness, while others kept it salty and plain. Buying chicken backs and necks for soup stock was a thrifty way of creating nutritious meals from the cheapest parts of the chicken. Butchers sold these pieces dirt cheap because there wasn't much meat on them, but Black cooks knew their real value. The rich, flavorful stock made from chicken backs and necks became the base for chicken soup, rice, or dumplings. The process was simple but required patience. Simmered on low heat for hours until the broth turned golden and bits of meat fell off the bones. Vegetables like onions, celery, and carrots were added to make the soup heartier and more filling. For families on tight budgets, one pot of chicken soup made from backs and necks was enough to feed everyone multiple meals throughout the week. Children loved the warm, comforting taste, especially on cold days or when someone was sick. In the 70s, buying dry beans and peas by the pound was one of the smartest ways to stretch the grocery budget. Beans and peas were incredibly cheap, and when prepared properly, a pound could feed a family for days. Black-eyed peas, pinto beans, lima beans, and navy beans were staples that required nothing but water, seasoning, and time to turn into filling meals. Dry beans needed to soak overnight before cooking, but the result was a thick, flavorful pot of beans that paired perfectly with rice or cornbread. These meals were filling, nutritious, and deeply satisfying despite being very cheap to prepare. For many Black families, beans and peas were more than just cheap food. They were tied to cultural traditions and Southern cooking heritage passed down through generations. Black-eyed peas were always present on New Year's Day for good luck, and Sundays usually had a big pot simmering on the stove. Buying lard for cooking and frying was a necessity for families needing affordable cooking fat that would last a long time. Lard came in large white containers and was much cheaper than butter or vegetable oil. Black cooks used lard to fry chicken, fish, and pork chops. getting that crispy golden crust everyone loved. It was also essential for making the flakiest biscuits, pie crusts, and pastries that melted in your mouth. Grandmothers swore by lard in their recipes, insisting the texture and flavor it provided couldn't be captured by anything else, that a single container of lard could last for weeks, even though it was used sparingly. It worked effectively in almost any dish requiring frying or baking. Some families rendered their own lard from fatback and stored it in jars to use throughout the month. Drinking Kool-Aid as the main beverage was a reality for Black families who couldn't keep fresh juice or soda in the house. Kool-Aid packets were incredibly cheap, often just a few cents each, and one packet could make a big pitcher that lasted all day. Mothers mixed the powder with water and sugar, creating a sweet, colorful drink that children loved. Red, purple, and orange were the most popular flavors, and kids would argue about which one tasted better. Kool-Aid became the go-to drink at every meal from breakfast to dinner, always present in the refrigerator. Some families made it extra sweet, while others used less sugar to make the packet stretch further. Drinking Kool-Aid wasn't seen as a hardship because it tasted good and everyone in the neighborhood drank it. For parents, Kool-Aid was a simple, affordable way to give their children something they enjoyed without straining the budget. Keeping Spam and corned beef hash in the pantry, especially when money was tight, was a smart way to have protein on hand. These canned meats were affordable, stayed good on the shelf, and could turn into a meal within minutes. Spam could be sliced and fried until crispy, served with eggs at breakfast or in sandwiches at lunch. Corned beef hash was ready to heat, usually fried in a pan until the edges turned brown and crispy. For children, Spam and corned beef hash tasted surprisingly good when cooked properly and seasoned well. Some families mixed corned beef hash with potatoes and onions to make it more flavorful and feed more people. These canned meats weren't fancy, but they were reliable and always within reach when fresh meat wasn't an option. Buying flour in big bags was crucial for families who depended on homemade bread to fill everyone's stomachs. Flour came in 5-pound, 10-pound, or even larger bags that could last for weeks, depending on how much baking happened at home. Biscuits were a breakfast essential, made fresh every morning and served hot with butter, jelly, or sausage gravy. The smell of biscuits baking in the oven filled the house and signaled that a good meal was coming. Flour was also used for making pancakes, dumplings, and breading for fried chicken and fish. For Black families, knowing how to make biscuits from scratch was a valuable skill that both saved money and filled bellies. Grandmothers taught their daughters and granddaughters how to make perfect biscuits by hand, with many cooks measuring ingredients by feel rather than exact measurements. Buying chitlins during hog-killing season in the South was a practice rooted in tradition and necessity for Black families. Chitlins, or pig intestines, required extensive cleaning and careful preparation before cooking. They were cheap because many people didn't find them appetizing, but Black cooks had mastered the art of turning them into a delicacy. The cleaning process was long and labor-intensive, requiring multiple rinses and attention to detail. Once cleaned, chitlins were boiled for hours with onions, garlic, and spices until they became tender and flavorful. The smell of cooking chitlins was strong and distinctive, filling the entire house, and sometimes the whole neighborhood. For many families, chitlins were a special dish reserved for holidays and family gatherings. Children had mixed feelings. Some loved them while others couldn't get past the smell. Stocking up on canned mackerel and sardines when fresh fish was so expensive was a cheap way to keep protein in the pantry. These small cans were affordable and nutritious, making them a practical choice for families on tight budgets. Canned mackerel could be dredged in a little cornmeal and fried in a pan, producing a crispy meal that tasted almost like fresh fish. Sardines were usually eaten straight from the can, placed on crackers with hot sauce or mustard for a quick snack or a light meal. Some families would mix canned mackerel into salmon croquettes, adding breadcrumbs, eggs, and seasonings to stretch the ingredients further. For children, getting used to the strong fishy smell of sardines was hard, but most came to love the salty, briny taste. Mothers appreciated that these canned fish were always available at the corner store and never spoiled, making them a reliable backup option when money ran out. If these memories hit home, drop a comment below about which grocery item brings back the most memories for you. Hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss another trip down memory lane.